Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Just be 1 second. Just be 1 second. Just putting up a tweet. I have the worst typos. It's really pathetic. All right. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Um, what's up, Modus? Thanks for being here, man. Really appreciate it. Um, yeah, I don't know how long I'll go tonight. I am actually sick. I have a cold. At least I could talk today. There will be no yelling, though. I can tell you that. Lost my voice, just coughing. Normal cold stuff. Um, but I'm such a whiner when I'm sick, so I'm trying to be very consistent in doing a live stream every Monday night. And then when I get off works Wednesdays, trying to do more videos throughout the week. So even if it's only one or two people watching, that's okay. I wanted to try to remain consistent. So the direction I wanted to go today was first I wanted to talk about Comey and his interview he had with Wallace on Fox News and just kind of the absurdity of that. Then I wanted to juxtapose the Fisa situation we see with the corruption of the FBI, the media, and the Democrats and how that's playing out in the impeachment scandal. We can see that replaying out again. And then I also wanted to talk about kind of just the way the media is framing, the cast of characters they're bringing on, the Lisa Pages of the world, and things like that to be able to talk about this. So, as the media has begun to try to reframe this, there's a couple little hiccups in the media's attempt. Now, the problem for the media is they're able to write off people like me. They're able to write off people like Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson or John Solomon. They just say hacks, hacks, hacks. But they're having more difficulty with Horowitz because they relied so much on Horowitz and they know that it was actually the Democrats that suggested appointing Horowitz to investigate these matters first. So, in case you didn't know, the Democrats were the ones who originally called for an inspector general report on Comey and his actions in the Hillary Clinton investigation. And that's because they felt, and partially correctly so, I think, that Comey's coming out and saying that they reopened the investigation into Hillary a couple days before the election may have cost her some votes. Thanks, Modus. I appreciate that, by the way. So don't forget that. That's one of the reasons that the Democrats and the media are having such a difficult time of going after Horowitz because they called for him initially. So what they've done is, I actually think Horowitz did a pretty good job. Of course, I would have liked to have seen him gone further because I think that there is clear evidence that this wasn't accidental by the FBI. This was intentional, both in the Hillary investigation, the Comey report, where never forget, IG Horowitz referred Comey criminally for prosecution for leaking classified evidence to try to go after Trump, and in the report on the FISA abuses. So that's three separate IG investigations that we've had. But don't forget, the beginning of those investigations was called for by the Democrats. So it's very difficult for them to do the same thing they do to, I'd say the premier person they do this to is John Solomon. Where Solomon, by the way, he was correct on all of this FISA abuse and all of his reporting on that. He comes out and gives factual evidence as to why they'll find that there was abuse, or factual evidence as to why there was corruption going on with the Bidens, and the firing of Victor Shokin and things like that. They just say, oh, John Solomon's a terrible guy. Oh, John Solomon talked to Rudy Giuliani once, so he's terrible. They're having trouble doing that with Horowitz. Instead, they're relying on Horowitz's professionalism, which is that Horowitz isn't going to say anything that he assumes. Horowitz's job is to merely say, here is a factual matter of the evidence I found. They're looking to see if abuses did occur, but he's not really looking to see what the intent behind those abuses were. For example, he can't impanel grand juries. He can't look at agencies outside the FBI, whether it be UK intelligence, Italian intelligence. He can't even look at other US agencies such as the CIA and things like that. So all he could do is look at the information that was basically willfully given to him. For example, he could look at the work phones of people in the FBI, but he doesn't necessarily have access to their personal phones and things like that because of that. And I don't blame Horowitz from this. He just says, look, here are all these terrible abuses. I don't know why they happened. I wasn't given a satisfactory answer. And he actually says the only two reasons I could come up with were incredible incompetence or bias. Now, if you watch my last live stream or even just the little snippet my friend edited for me, the 4 minutes where I'm kind of screaming, my wife says I sounded like Alex Jones. But I was not yelling about gay frogs yet. I was rightfully upset, and I think we should all be upset. The damage done is incredible. So I think it's evident that this was actual bias. This wasn't just gross incompetence. But as I outlined in that video, if it was gross incompetence, that's almost worse, because that means that the premier investigative agency, the most powerful one in the history of the world, that's supposed to keep us safe from all sorts of heinous crimes, literally can't do what your average first or second grader would be able to do, such as they don't know how to file paperwork that doesn't say and make it up saying the opposite of what it's supposed to say. That's something that any kindergartner could do. Our FBI, we're to believe, the top level people, handpicked teams, 3 handpicked teams that knew that they were going to be scrutinized. They literally can't accomplish the most basic of facts. What chance do we have of them finding out, like, if ISIS wants to attack us, or if why the Las Vegas shooter was shooting people, etc. So that's why I believe there was obvious bias. But nonetheless, what we're talking about here then is Horowitz and what he was able to find. So I think that Horowitz did a decent job, and the media's been trying to frame it as saying what they want. And so what you see happening is you see Comey and Schiff and all of these Democrats repeat over and over again, but the reasoning for the opening of the Russia investigation was legit. And that's all that matters. And that's going to be their talking point. Now, again, the analogy I used on my last video would be this. You might, as a police officer, have the right to pull someone over because they didn't use their blinker, right? So therefore, the opening of your stopping that person was legitimate. But if you then plant cocaine on them, it hardly matters that the opening, no one's going to say, well, forget about that cocaine that cop planted. I mean, the person didn't use their blinker, so... And that's how absurd this is. Again, I'm not going to rehash what I did in my last video that much, because that's something I do a lot, but the IG didn't say, he wasn't like celebrating like, yay, it was, the investigation into Trump-Russia collusion was legit, it was open for legitimate reasons. You could tell from the tone of it, he's saying it was legit because the threshold is so low. In fact, he was dismayed to learn that the threshold's so low that even low-level, not your base-level FBI person, but the people just right above them, very low on the totem pole, even they would have been allowed to send in spies with wires to spy on people connected to Trump's team, based on just rumor and innuendo. And they didn't have to tell any other agencies. In fact, the IG says he recommends that these policies change, because you can tell he's kind of troubled, like, really? This is all it takes to spy on this? And again, this shouldn't be celebrated by the Democrats and the left. Remember, they're supposedly the civil libertarians. That's what they would have told you. But now, all of a sudden, because Orange Man bad, they're cheering for corruption, the likes of which we've never seen. So they're actually celebrating. Yeah, it was, the FBI rules are written with such a low threshold that, of course, you could use opposition research that's unverified to spy on your political opponent. Of course. But we know if Trump would do that, I mean, literally, why shouldn't Trump today come out and be like, hey, I'm going to order Director Wray, who's, as you're saying, Modus, was clearly a joke in deep state. But let's say Trump puts in someone new in the FBI, Trump puts in Barr at the head of the FBI or someone like that. Steve Bannon, whoever. He appoints to lead it, and Bannon's like, cool, now we heard a bunch of rumors about the Democrats, now we're going to spy on them. The Democrats would have no right to complain. Of course they would, because they're professional hypocrites. In fact, almost everything they accuse anyone of is exactly what they themselves are doing. So of course they complain. Look no further than we saw how insane Schiff's impeachment thing was, colluding with the whistleblower, refusing to allow Republicans to bring forth witnesses, changing times, Nadler did the same thing, changed when the vote was going to occur, all of that stuff. But now they're saying, can you believe McConnell might do similar things? Well, McConnell's not meeting with the whistleblower in secret and lying about it. He's doing what he's supposed to do, communicating with the president, a member of his party, in order to have the best defense. But even that, oh, that's not fair. It's not fair. They don't even see the irony. It's like, dude, you literally just cheered for a corrupt, one-sided process, and now you're upset when predictably that same type of thing could be used against you. So of course they wouldn't care. If Trump did the exact same thing that the Obama FBI did to spy on whoever his Democratic opponent will be, there'd be riots in the street. Democrats would be saying, this is the real impeachment. So it's hardly anything to, yeah, sorry about that. I know, I'm really trying to, I understand that a lot of my audience are people that actually have lives and they don't have time to sit around and read this stuff. So I should be careful with the acronyms. Yeah, the IG is the Inspector General. And for those of you who don't know, basically the way it works is all of our kind of branches have their own Inspector General. I'm by no means an expert on it, but it's very similar to, like, if you watch Law and Order or something like Internal Affairs. In other words, it's the person within each of these agencies whose job it is to make sure that there's no abuses going on within those agencies. Particularly in the CIA and the FBI, NSA, those type of things would be important. You want an Inspector General to make sure that the people aren't in those agencies aren't abusing their power, which the Inspector General Horowitz found that's exactly what the FBI was doing. 17 times, in fact. You have to bear with my crappy voice. I'm so sorry. I've just been coughing all week, so that's what we see kind of occurred with what's going on with that. So again, the media tactics just focusing on, but it's okay, the start of the investigation. But I already went through why that's ridiculous. And the other thing they're saying is two other points. One, that there was no bias found. And second, that these were just kind of mistakes. And if you watched Comey's interview with Wallace, that's exactly the tact that he tried to take. Now, I would have liked, and maybe later in the week, I'll go the whole way through that video, but just with being sick and I've been very busy at work, I wasn't able to queue up the interview, but I do recommend you watch it. Even though Wallace, I think, has been pretty poor as far as fairness with the impeachment stuff, he seems to all of a sudden have gone never Trumper. I actually do think he does a fairly good job of interviewing Comey and kind of holding him, trying to out him on his lies. So let's just talk about some of the high points. Hey, what's up, Pat? Oh, thank you, Pat. Yeah, the length of my videos are amazing. Unless you're my wife, then she thinks the length of my ability to talk in long ways not a good thing. So Comey basically takes two tacks, right? He says, Horowitz didn't find any evidence of intentional bias and that these were just mistakes by the FBI. And that's not true. That's not true at all. And Wallace does an okay job, but you need someone, fair enough, Wallace is a news person, so I don't know how passionate you want them to be. But notice that Comey wouldn't go on with someone that would have pushed back even harder. He would only go on with someone that he thought was, at that point, had been criticizing Trump. For example, Wallace just said last week that Trump's abuses to the press are like historic or something like that, which is nonsense. So maybe Comey felt he would be comfortable and wouldn't be pushed back upon, but he was. So let's take Comey's claim, for example, that there was no bias found. Wallace correctly points that the IG was specifically asked by, I think, Senator Kennedy, the second to last person to do the questioning. He was specifically asked, can you basically were you given a satisfactory reason as to why these abuses occurred? And Horowitz is like, no, I wasn't. And he says there's basically only two explanations. It was either incredible incompetence or it was intentional misconduct or a combination thereof. And he says you could understand how people would think it's intentional misconduct. Comey's just saying, he didn't find evidence of bias, but Comey's smart enough to know what that means. Just because he didn't find evidence of bias doesn't mean that there wasn't bias. Now, if you remember, this was actually a type of argument that the Democrats were making with the Mueller report, right? Remember they said, Mueller didn't exonerate Trump. Remember this? He didn't exonerate. And we said, but that's not the job of a prosecutor to exonerate someone. That's not what they do. Well, this situation's a little different, though. So you can already see the Democrats and people like Comey being hypocritical. This situation's different because, unlike in that situation, what was being said was Mueller was saying, we cannot prove or disprove or exonerate, basically, that Trump committed a crime. In this case, we know that abuses were committed. What Horowitz is saying is, I can't definitively give you what the reason for those abuses were. Now, as someone who's trying to steelman my opponent or to make their argument as strong as possible, I could agree with Comey's characterization in that he's saying, oh, no evidence of bias was found. That argument could apply if then Horowitz had said, instead, here's the reasons we found for these mistakes. So, for example, if Horowitz would say, after our lengthy interviews with all the people who committed these 17 abuses, we were given a credible explanation of why that occurred. Then Comey's claim of, oh, and he didn't find evidence of bias, then it would make sense because you'd say, okay, well, Horowitz found the explanation and it wasn't bias. But that's not what Horowitz said. Horowitz was quite clear. He said, I have no clue. I was not given a satisfactory answer. So Horowitz is doing his due diligence to saying, I didn't see evidence of bias. And what he means by that is, again, remember what he had access to. I already talked about it early in this video. He didn't have grand juries to subpoena things. He didn't have access to like home phones. He only had the work emails, the work phones and things like that. He only was able to talk to the people that willfully talked to him at the FBI. He wasn't able to talk to other countries' agencies or outside agencies like the CIA. And so when he says, I didn't find evidence of bias, what he's saying is he didn't find text messages that said, we're doing this to screw over Trump. Now, one of the things that's lost in the shuffle when you look at the text we've seen from FBI agents is, keep in mind how much hubris you would have to be Lisa Page or Peter Strzok, for example. Let's say you hated Trump and you wanted to talk about insurance policies and smelling Trump supporters at Walmart and thinking Hillary should win 1,000,000 to 1, etc., right? Wouldn't you do that on your home personal phone? But no, they actually used their work phones, knowing full well that Freedom of Information Act requests and other such things would give access to that material because it's considered work material. That's unbelievable hubris. I mean, think about that. You probably have a job somewhere. Maybe you have a work email. Are you going to talk crap on your boss on your work email? Or are you going to wait until you and your coworker go to lunch and then face-to-face talk crap about them? But it just goes to show you, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page didn't care. None of these people at the FBI cared. In fact, just to piggyback off this, Horowitz admits that he talked to all these people, and it goes the whole way to the top of the FBI, he said. From the base level agents, 3 handpicked teams, the whole way up the chain to the top of the FBI. And they knew that not only was this one of the most important investigations they would ever do, but that it would be the most heavily scrutinized. Now, at your work, I hope you do a good job. I think I do a good job. But if you know for a fact that whatever project you're working on that day is going to be heavily scrutinized by not just your company, but outside people looking at it, you're going to make sure you do your best possible job, right? Yet the FBI did the opposite. 17 abuses, 17 lies. And I'll get to, these weren't mistakes, right? Let me just read the comments real quick here. Thank you. So we can see that the incredible hubris they had. What Horowitz is saying is, well, look, I didn't find that type of stuff from Bill Priestap. I didn't find the text saying I hate Trump from Bill Priestap or for James Comey or for Andrew McCabe, right? Or for Baker or from Rosenstein. But we can see based on their actions post their time at the FBI, or even some of them even still there, that clearly they have a bias against Trump. Just because they didn't have a text saying, like, can anyone in good faith argue that James Comey didn't have a bias against Trump? I mean, I would welcome the challenge to debate someone who thinks such, but I mean, that would be preposterous. Or Rod Rosenstein, who was threatening to wear a wire to remove Trump. Do you think he didn't have bias? Or how about Baker and Rebecca, who were supposed to be were aware that Comey was going to be defensively briefing Trump about the dossier, but instead took that time to have a powwow to discuss trying to get evidence to find Trump guilty of something. These are actions that people without bias would take. There's no other explanation. So we can see that the bias was there, but still, Horowitz can't prove that he didn't personally see an email. Now, remember, the irony here is, the Democrats and the media and the intel agency or the establishment or the deep state, whatever you want to call it, right? When it comes to Trump, they can have no evidence of his intent whatsoever, and they assume his guilt. For example, if you've watched the impeachment hearings, I've argued from the get-go that the Republicans are making the arguments in the reverse order of what they should, right? The Republicans' arguments have been basically threefold. The first is there's corruption with the whistleblower. Okay, that's fair. The second is there was no quid pro quo. Okay, that's fair. And the third is that they're barely making, oh, by the way, Trump should have investigated Burisma, the Bidens, and Ukrainian election interference. But those arguments should be made in reverse, because if you win to the average person that there was malfeasance with the whistleblower and that there was no quid pro quo, those are still defensive arguments. A person not really following could say, oh, but it was still corrupt for Trump to want to investigate this stuff, so maybe he should be impeached. But if you win that, yes, actually Trump had every right, in fact, a duty to be investigating that stuff, which he did, as I've proved over and over again, then it doesn't even matter if there was a quid pro quo. It doesn't matter if the whistleblower was corrupt. Because the American people say, so wait a minute, the argument is that we know Biden should have been investigated. We know that Ukraine tried to interfere in the 2016 election. We know that this company Burisma is corrupt. Trump just wanted to investigate that corruption and he should be impeached for that? No, people don't buy that. And if you even look at the Democrats' impeachment articles and everything, what do they keep saying? This was to benefit the election, to benefit Trump, to get foreign interference to help him in the election. How do we know that? That speaks to his intent. Is there a credible reason that he could have wanted this investigation that has nothing to do with the 2020 election? Of course there is. One, we know that he's very hesitant to give foreign aid anyways. Second, we know that the abuse of potentially misusing $1 billion U.S. tax dollars in the form of a congressionally approved aid package would be one of the biggest crimes that the executive branch could commit. Therefore, it's incumbent on the executive branch that comes after, i.e. the branch that enforces the law, to make sure that that law wasn't broken. So there's all kinds of, the point I'm trying to make here is, when looking at the differences, look at how they just, and then look at how they assumed, oh, Trump's intent was just to help him in the election. We know that. We're not going to listen to anything. We just assume if there was a quid pro quo, he was guilty. Then we look at Biden. We know that Biden and Obama had a quid pro quo. Without any investigation whatsoever, the same people say, oh, we know Biden and Obama's intent was good. It wasn't to personally help Biden or his son. It was a good intent. It was to end corruption. So on one hand, and you see people like Ben Shapiro that are supposedly Republicans doing the same thing. On one hand, they give every Democrat every benefit of the doubt, every establishment person. If you're in the FBI, if you're Hillary Clinton, oh, your intent in taking that having that classified server, your intent was probably good. With Joe Biden, oh, your intent was probably good. With Obama, oh, your intent was probably good. With the FBI and FISA abuses, oh, the intent was probably good. But with Trump, with no evidence, oh, his intent's corrupt. So, I mean, it just goes to show you, you have to, my advice, I'd say, when you're looking at this stuff is always, and do it on the right as well, right? Like, I could say that it's coming, say what you will. I'm Republican, I am. I'm conservative, I am. I'm a Trump supporter. But certainly there are times when you can see this type of behavior on the right, this type of hypocrisy. For example, you had plenty of Tea Party people that were upset about deficit spending under Obama. I was one of them. But then when Trump deficit spends, all of a sudden they're okay with it, You should be wary of that type of stuff. So look at how when you have these multiple investigations going, what are the differences in how people are changing their opinions? And every single time you can see the hypocrisy that comes from the establishment. That includes the Democrats, the intel agents, and the media. Every single time. It's terribly corrupt. And again, if you've listened to me for a while, you know I've said from the get-go, if Trump or people connected to him committed crimes, they should be held accountable for them. But all I ask is for equal application of the law. I could deal with people that disagree with me. For example, you could say, yeah, I think that any quid pro quo with foreign aid should be illegal. Therefore, Trump should be punished for it. But I also feel that Obama and Biden should have been punished for it. Okay, I disagree. I think that's kind of a crazy stance. But fair enough. At least you're not being a hypocrite. That's someone I can have a discussion with. So the argument that Comey's trying to make is, oh, we were kind of exonerated because it showed no bias. That is not what Horowitz said. That's how the media will spin it. That's how Comey will try to spin it. But one, see how that's a double standard. While they assume the intent of the people at the FBI and assume that it's always in the best positive light for them. And then with Trump, they do the exact opposite, or people connected to Trump. So see, and when you see someone engaged in hypocrisy like that, that shows you that you shouldn't value their opinion. And secondly, Comey can't answer as to what the explanation is then. He just says mistakes were made, which is the second point. These weren't mistakes, right? This is what's infuriating. And by the way, the FISA court today released a letter. And you see people celebrating this. Oh, the FISA court rarely speaks out. And the fact that they came out and they kind of excoriated the FBI and wagged their finger and said, hey, don't do that again. That's bad. Don't do it. Sorry, I'm not buying it. And you should be skeptical of this too. First thing is they said the FBI's mistakes. These were not mistakes. Second, we saw the FISA court do this in 2002. They excoriated the Clinton administration for lying to FISA court. Anything changed? No. I'm sick and tired of this. Oh, if we wag our fingers at these people, and you see this over and over when it comes to the elites. You know, look at the 2008 banking crisis. All the people that were at the top of these banking sectors that were engaged in unethical or criminal behavior, no one punished. We just wagged our fingers sternly at them. Did anything change? No. It's the same with all of these governmental abuses. We wag our finger and nothing changes. So why would it change this time? I don't care that the FISA court came out and said this. It's a joke. They're trying to cover their own behinds. Because guess what? They probably want the FISA process to continue. That's their jobs, right? So they don't want to say, my God, this is horribly corrupt. Scrap it. They're not going to say that. They'll say, well, we recommend some changes occur. I recommend the elimination of it. I recommend the elimination of the FBI and the CIA and the FISA process. Yeah, Dib, thank you for bringing that up. I love Jimmy Dore. Jimmy is a progressive. Jimmy hates Trump with a passion. He's like a social justice. I think he's supporting Bernie. I terribly disagree with most of his domestic policy stuff, his priorities. You know, he's a progressive. He's a social justice person. But he has integrity, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. I could deal with someone like Jimmy Dore. Because we have disagreements and we could fight it out and have our disagreements. We can call each other names, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I know that he has integrity. He's been against this Russia crap the entire time. He's against the impeachment crap. And he desperately wants to see Trump lose. One of his points, which he's absolutely correct, is, hey, you stupid Democrats, can't you see you're actually helping Trump with all this crap? Because once Trump gets vindicated, then his numbers will go up. And that's exactly what we see. The other thing is Jimmy Dore is funny, and I think comedy solves everything. So even if I disagree with you, you're funny, I'd still like to hang out with you and like to listen to you. So I recommend checking out his show. It's spelled D-O-R-E, though, so I'll write it down. He has a YouTube channel, and yeah, I mean, he did a great breakdown of Wallace's interview of Comey, for example, which I did watch. So you can see kind of the abuse and the corruption that's going on here. And the FISA courts are they're brushing under the rug. Other things, like, for example, the FISA court, what was her name? Judge Collier or something. Oh, no, Jimmy Dore hates Trump about more than anyone. Like, trust me. He just has integrity and understands the corruption going up against him. So it's worth checking out his show, though. He brings on people that agree with him, like Aaron Mattei, Glenn Greenwald, other people like that. The irony is, Jimmy Dore will always be crapping on, like, he'll put up videos all the time. It'll be like, even Tucker Carlson agrees. The truth of the matter is, someone like Tucker and Jimmy Dore actually agree on 80% of the stuff. You know, so I think if we get over this hump, and that's one of the things that I try to tell to my Democratic friends. Look, you hate Trump as a person. That's fine. I could totally understand not liking him as a person. That's a very reasonable stance. Or maybe you dislike some of his, but, you know, you're really upset about, you know, DACA or the kids in cages thing, even though Obama administration did a bunch of that crap too. But fine. You don't like Trump's policies on that. Or you didn't like the tax cuts. You don't like tariffs. That's fine. Those are policy disagreements. That we can talk about that. That's fine. But to me, none of that matters if we have corrupt intel officials that are running the show. And so I think that what we should do is come together on the right and the left, not necessarily support Trump as a person, but support the fight against this deep state. And then once we win that, go back to having two parties that maybe disagree, but actually care about people. Wouldn't that be great? I would love to be having policy discussions of why I think the progressives are wrong and them telling me why, as a capitalist, I'm wrong and all this stuff. That's great. At least you could maybe trust, well, even if I disagree with them, I think they actually want to help people. What we have now is a bunch of corruption. So it doesn't matter what your issue is. If the FBI doesn't agree with it, then your issue is not going to be resolved. It's not going to be discussed. So I don't buy Judge Collier, or whatever her name is, from the Fisa court that wrote the letter. One of the things she said that I heavily dispute was she was unaware of these abuses until, she found out from the IG. Well, Nunes was talking about this a year and a half ago. Do they not have cable? These FISA judges were unaware? Don't you think if you're running this process and you heard someone who's the chair of one of the committees charged with oversight saying, hey, there were significant abuses here, wouldn't you reach out to them and say, can you at least show me the evidence that you think shows that? Instead, what? They just took CNN's word for it? Oh, that was all a lie. It seems clear to me that had the FISA court been more proactive, that this could have been solved after at least the first or second warrant on Carter Page, but they weren't. And so don't believe them when they're coming out trying to save face. It's the same with all these media people. Oh, now they're telling, oh, well, Comey, he kind of made some mistakes. Oh, the FBI made some. Oh, McCabe, there were some mistakes. These people lied to you. They told you to even look into the FBI was hurting our country, that it hurt sources and methods. Remember, they said releasing the Nunes memo would jeopardize lives. It would jeopardize FBI agents. It was a conspiracy theory. It was tearing apart the country. That's what they told you. That's what Jake Tapper told you. That's what Cuomo told you. That's what the New York Times told you. Now to hear them say, oh, there were abuses. No. You as a journalist fought against that being outed because you're not a journalist. We don't have a free press. You're a mouthpiece for the corrupt FBI. So the fact that you're now saying, oh, well, there were abuses, that's still you being a mouthpiece for the corrupt FBI. You're just trying to downplay it. Because these people know that if they just flat out lie and say, no, there were no abuses, that even the people that barely pay attention will say, well, wait a minute, that's not true. So they have to say, oh, yeah, there were some abuses, but it wasn't that bad, and they're fixing them already. That's what the FISA court was doing with their letter today. That's what Comey was doing. That's what the media's doing. And so Comey's saying, oh, yeah, there were just little mistakes, but we're already in the process of resolving them. And, that's not what happened. And again, if you're not paying attention, I've heard, honest to goodness, you might not believe me, but please, I ask you to believe me on this. I've heard people that are left-wing that hate Trump, but I still think are decent people that mean well. And I've had them tell me, I don't know why you're getting so fired up. It was just clerical errors. This was not clerical errors. Let's just go through two examples real quick. The two most severe ones. Probably the least severe one, which, if you hear it and think about it, is shocking, is that they knew from the get-go, the FBI knew from the get-go, that Carter Page actually had previously worked with the CIA. And in working with the CIA, he dealt with corrupt Russians, wore a wire, and actually was instrumental in helping getting at least one corrupt Russian thrown in jail, or charged with the crime at least. I don't know if they were found guilty or not, but at least charged, which is what you want. So much so that the CIA gave him a positive review for his work with them. Now, I was being told back when I'm arguing this in 2017 with people, one of the things they told me over and over again was, oh, but actually Carter Page was surveyed in 2013 and 2014. So that kind of proves that it was no big deal that they are resurveying him. But here's the full story, and you don't really hear many people talking about this. Carter Page seems naive. He was a naval grad. He seems like someone who was naive. Now, he had business interests. He was an educator. He was working with think tanks and things like that in Russia. That's not a crime, by the way. As much xenophobia and McCarthyism as the new left, the new Democratic Party, remember the party of peace, now they argue if you even talk to a Russian, somehow you're guilty of a crime. Well, despite them wishing that, it's not the case. So Carter Page is dealing with business interests, and he's working with universities in Russia. And he's approached by Russians, possibly engaged in some deal. The FBI or the CIA's onto this. So they listen into him, and then when they find out that he's not guilty of anything, they bring him in and they say, hey, do you realize these people you're dealing with are kind of corrupt gangster type people? And he's like, oh, I didn't know that. And they're like, would you like to help us bring them down? And he says, yes. Now, the FBI knew all of this. Yet, instead of just, and here's the crucial part, right? Where you need to really think about both the examples I'm going to give. These are, by the way, just 3 of the 17. And there's actually more abuses than just the 17. Because each time you resubmit, you have what's called the Woods procedure, which says you have to re-verify all the information. Well, they never did. So the IG says there were over 60 examples of that, 9 of which were just straight out fabrications and lies, saying they did re-verify stuff and they didn't. Lying to a government investigative body. You know, the same thing that they're charging Flynn with, that they charge Cohen with, they charge Manafort with. But when they do it, it's okay, right? Every single time. But anyways, a clerical error would be this, possibly. Somehow this information got lost in the shuffle, and therefore none of it was reported to the FISA court. But that's not what happened. Instead, they reported the connections that Carter Page had to these Russians. But they left out that they were connections at the behest of the CIA. Now, think about this. I don't even know, I can't even, a lot of times you use analogies to simplify things. I don't know how to make this one simpler. Imagine that your local police force says, hey, we would like you to go into this house because we think that there are drug dealers there. Would you please wear a wire and go talk to these drug dealers so we can arrest them? And you're like, okay. And so you go in and it leads to the arrest and your police are like, thanks, man, that's great. But then the state police or the other next town's police agency, they decide that they want to investigate you for a crime. And part of that investigation, they say, oh, you went into that drug den. You talked to all those drug dealers. Well, yeah, because I was asked to do so by my police force. That's insanity. That's the opposite of the truth. If you were just making a clerical error, you would have forgot to include any of that, which is still unbelievable. I mean, that alone would be absurd, right? The FBI just forgot this guy worked with the CIA. Yeah, I hear you, Tim. That should be my catchphrase. Why is it that that's not what happened? Because that's the narrative. And the Republicans need to do a better job of rebutting this stuff. So this wasn't an error. They told the opposite of the truth. They painted the opposite type of picture. Picture someone's a cop, and they arrest drug dealers every day, right? But the picture someone paints of him is, this guy's always hanging around drug dealers. And they leave out, well, yeah, he's a cop arresting drug dealers. That's what they were doing. They're painting the opposite picture. Not only did they know this information before they applied for the first warrant, but then there's more shenanigans that occur later. Now, at this time, it's worth saying, Comey was also asked how much of this he knew, and he played dumb. He was like, oh, that's not the way things work. We at the top didn't know all this information. Well, that's not what the law says, buddy. The law says you have to be able to, as the person who's at the head of this and is signing off on the FISA warrant, he's signing off that it's accurate. So he had to have been given the information to show this is what's going on. Remember, Carter Page even was on Tucker Carlson at the time he was being surveyed, talking about how he had previously worked with another government administration, a government agency in helping bring down Russians. But at the same time that he's publicly saying that, the FBI is pretending they have no knowledge of this, when Horowitz found that they did know. Have you noticed that every time one of these high-level officials get caught with something, they're including right up to Obama, their argument's always, I didn't know about that until I read it in the newspaper. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's garbage. Comey knew, McCabe knew, Rosenstein knew, Baker knew, Rebecca knew. They all knew. They're seeking to wiretap this guy. They knew that he was formerly a CIA asset, and they chose to only use the portion of he talked with Russians and leave out the portion he did it to help his country. Instead, they painted him as a Russian spy. And don't forget, that's what they were alleging. In order to get a FISA warrant on an American, you can't just say, oh, we think they're a bumbling oaf, we'd like to spy on them. You have to argue they are operating as an agent of a foreign power. So they literally claimed that Carter Page was committing treason and was working as a spy for Russia, when they knew that he had worked to bring down Russians as an asset of the CIA. So as bad as that is, later a low-level FBI guy who notices this is troubled by it. Thank goodness for this person. And says, wait a minute, didn't we find out this guy was a CIA asset? And so they say, well, we better email the CIA representative and see what they say. The CIA representative emails them back and says, yes, he was an asset for us. The FBI lawyer, what's his name? Kleinstein. He takes that email that says, yes, Carter Page was an asset for the CIA. And he rewrites it to say, no, he was not an asset for the CIA. Now, that's clearly a crime. That's altering evidence. Not altering it, right? Think of it this way. Let's say we're talking about thumbprints, right? Fingerprints. And so the police are waiting for fingerprints on a gun to see if their suspect is guilty. The fingerprints come back and it says, no, it's not his fingerprints. So how bad would it be for the police in that world to say, we're just going to pretend we didn't find any fingerprints? That's terrible, right? But you know what's worse? Just lying and saying, yeah, they were his fingerprints. That's what they did. That's what the FBI did. That's not a clerical error. That's not a mistake. Like you keep hearing Comey and the FISA court woman that put the letter out today, the judge. And you hear the media saying, oh, mistakes were made. That's not a mistake. That is willful misconduct. Now take a second back here, remember? Everyone's saying, oh, but we didn't find any evidence. Horowitz said he didn't see any evidence of intentional bias. How can you explain that any other way? Now we know that the lawyer that did this was tweeting things like #resistance and about how much he hated Trump. Yet we have to pretend, oh, maybe it was just gross incompetence. Can anyone out there explain to me what sort of incompetence tells you, oh, okay, I asked for something. I say, did this guy work with you? You say, yes, he did. And I say, no, I'm going to change that to say, no, he didn't work for you, and alter your evidence that you gave me. What kind of incompetence is that? And this is what I was saying earlier in my video. If that's what your argument is, if that's James Comey's argument, if that's the media and Christopher Wray's argument and the FISA court's argument and the Democrats' argument, we're in a lot of trouble. Because literally first graders know not to do that. The people that are running the most sophisticated intel agency in the history of the world don't know that you're not supposed to change evidence to say it's the opposite of what it is. That's literally the Democrats and the FBI's argument and the media's argument. No, it's just incompetence. They didn't know you weren't supposed to do that. Now, how could anyone take them serious? It's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Clearly it was intent. And Wallace had to push back against Comey. Comey said there was no criminality here. Wallace says, actually, that's not true. At least that lawyer's been referred to criminally. And what's Comey say? Well, he hasn't had his day in court. Well, that's funny. You didn't give Trump the same sort of the benefit of the doubt, did you? See you, Pat. Thanks. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up with the chat as we're going. Now, the other thing that's important to know here is Remember what I told you. Horowitz said that the FBI knew at the beginning of this, before the first application, that Carter Page had worked with the CIA. So the idea that this person altered the email and no one caught it, right? Because the picture they're trying to paint is, oh, okay, well, this was just some low-level person. No, it wasn't. It was a hand-picked person by McCabe, as Horowitz showed, who had their arguments like, it was just some like random FBI guy that came in. He was basically not even associated with the FBI. But at the same time, then why would such a low-level person have the ability in one of the most crucial investigations in FBI history to alter the course of it so drastically? Are you saying that our FBI's, what's the word I'm looking for, criteria or their protocol is so messed up that all it takes is some random low-level person and we could literally spy on a presidential campaign based on the opposite of the truth? That's nonsense. His work would have then been checked by all the people that are higher ups, including the specific people who signed for the Fisa warrant. Those people knew the truth. They read this email, supposedly a CIA person saying the opposite of what they knew the truth was. And instead of saying, well, wait a minute, did that CIA guy lie? Was there a mistake in how we received this email? What's going on? They rubber stamped it and said, yep, looks good to me. The idea that, oh, we're sorry, everyone at the top had no idea. That's what Comey's trying to say. I was at the top of this and I just had no clue. I didn't know. Meanwhile, he's on television up until the IG report saying that it vindicated him, that he couldn't prove that Trump wasn't a Russian asset, that he understood that the FISA application process was done legitimately. Why didn't he tell that if his claim is, I basically have no clue because I'm just a figurehead, why didn't he say that at the time? Maybe that wouldn't have helped his book sales, huh? Oh, Mr. Comey, do you think, the Nunes memo comes out. I'm Jake Tapper, Mr. Comey. Do you think that the Nunes memo is true? Do you think there were FISA abuses? Oh, I don't know, man. I basically do nothing at the FBI. I just rubber stamp things, so you have to call someone else in. That's not what Comey was saying, was it? Oh, it was legit. Of course it was legit. Now, as bad as that is, that's not even the worst abuse that they had. It is clear from anyone who's remotely objective that that wasn't a clerical error. That wasn't just some mistake. That was willful misconduct to mislead the FISA court because they wanted to spy on Trump's campaign. The second example is even worse. So for this, it takes a little bit of background. Remember, as I did with the first video I did in this, you could go back and watch like the day that the FISA report came out. It debunked many of the lies that I'd been hearing. I wrote about this on October 26, 2017. I said, if unverified opposition research was used to spy on a presidential campaign, it was the biggest political scandal in the history of our country. Right? October 26, 2017, I wrote that. Some of the things I heard was, no way that Oppo research was used for a FISA warrant. If it was definitely verified. And even if it was verified, they still wouldn't use it alone, and there had to be other stuff with it. Comey tried to make that argument again, right? He tried to say, oh, no, it wasn't. And Wallace has to say, dude, the IG said that this was the central thing that led to the wiretap. Well, I disagree with the characterization. Yes, Comey, we know you're a liar. We could listen to what Horowitz said. Without the Steele dossier, the FBI didn't even go to the FISA court, he said. They said, well, there's not enough here. Once they had the Steele dossier, they said, okay, now there's stuff here. I went specifically through it. There were 5 things that they said. Let's see if I can remember all 5. 1, they were like, Russia tried to interfere in the election. 2, Carter Page had dealt with Russians before. 3, he had, I forget, I'm missing one of them. But they were all background stuff. He talked about wanting to start a think tank in Russia. And then there was the Steele dossier. But all the other stuff's just background information. Again, I know that if you watch the media and if you listen to the Democrats, you might not know this. But you're allowed to have a business in Russia. You're allowed to talk to Russian people. That's not reason for the FBI to be able to violate your Fourth Amendment and spy on you. It's not. They have to accuse you of being a Russian spy. Where was all of the evidence of Carter Page being a Russian spy? Every single one of it. The IG report is quite clear. It actually gives the exact numbers of the documents that they used for the entirety of their case that Carter Page was a Russian spy. And it all comes from the Steele dossier. So Comey is again lying on national television. He plays like this Mr. Magoo. That's what Jimmy Dore and them are calling him. Like this bumbling, it said that? It said that the Steele dossier? Oh, I thought we had other stuff too, yeah, I guess we'll agree to disagree. No, we won't. Now, so it debunked all that. It was central, it was unverified. It was the reason that they were spying. This was the only wiretap of phone records, emails, things like that they had on the Trump campaign. And by the way, let's debunk something else real quick. Oh yeah, but this was a former Trump official. So they weren't spying on the campaign. That's ludicrous. They were able to get access to all of the material and all of the phone calls from the time that he was a member of the campaign and anytime he talked to anyone on the campaign going forward. In addition to that, I don't know the specifics of this, but I have heard whistleblowers such as Bill Binney, who was instrumental in setting up like the NSA, claim that you're allowed to basically bounce from one person to the next when you're doing these type of wiretaps. In other words, just because Donald Trump wasn't your target, if you have any information or any call of him talking to Carter Page or him talking to someone who has talked to Carter Page, then you're allowed to get that surveillance as well. And I'm not convinced, by the way, no one wants to talk about this. I keep liking it to why it's way worse than Watergate. Watergate, you had a couple of bumbling fools rifling through a hotel trying to find information on Nixon's opponent. Why was that important? Why would that be critical? Not just you're looking for evidence of crimes, but it'd be nice to know the strategy of your opponent, correct? Well, how do we know that that's not what was going on as well? How do we know? We know that there were all sorts of shady connections, such as Christopher Steele had been basically fired by the FBI, but they were still communicating through him through Bruce Orr, whose Orr's wife was working for Fusion GPS, who was then going back to the DOJ. We know that Sidney Blumenthal was talking to people specifically in the DOJ. For those of you who don't know, Sidney Blumenthal's basically a long-time hatchet man for the Clintons, one of their personal assistants and lawyers. So how do we know if the specific details of the campaign weren't being given that had nothing to do with crimes? I don't know. But we know from the Watergate situation that people were willing to risk breaking the law, and which ultimately led to Nixon's impeachment, just to get their hands on that type of info. So this idea, it was a former campaign person, it doesn't matter, that's ludicrous. Now, remember, Christopher Steele didn't have any I know I'm kind of being wordy here. He didn't have any firsthand knowledge of any of the claims he's making. He's just a guy who's like, I reached out to my sources, and this is what they told me. Now, from the get-go, again, it's difficult. And I don't blame people. It's not that I'm smarter than other people. Maybe it's just that I'm a good liar. I don't know. Or I just have free time on my hands. Or I just got a good BS detector. Jimmy Dore says that all the time. The original implication for why this entire thing was such a big deal was, Trump tried to get dirt on Hillary from Russians. And so what we were told was, we're going to prove that by Hillary Clinton's team paying a foreign spy to get dirt on Trump from Russians. Literally, they're going to prove Trump did exactly what they're doing. That would be like me saying, I'm going to prove that my neighbor broke into my house, and I'm going to prove that by breaking into my neighbor's house. Well, I'm still committing the same crime my neighbor did, even if I'm right. So from the outset, you knew it was like, wait, what? Is this garbage? And of course, you couldn't get anyone to admit it. It was okay because Hillary paid an intermediary. That's okay. No, it's not. Everybody knew it. And unlike the Trump team, Hillary's team was successful in getting that Kremlin source dirt. And so successful, again, as I've said over and over, this was the biggest, if we are to believe the Mueller report and we're to believe the Democrats and the FBI, and that the Steele dossier was sourced by Kremlin officials, then this was the biggest example of Russia interfering in our elections and in our system. Because we're still talking about it. The impeachment articles actually still mention Russiagate. To this day, we're trying to impeach a president partially on this crap. Something like 30-some% of Democrats, including some in Congress, still believe that Trump's a Russian asset. That all came from these Kremlin officials. Yet somehow, Mueller, who was tasked with investigating Russia disinformation to influence our political system, never got around to those Kremlin officials. The most successful example of Russian interference. But I digress. Anyways, all we need to know from here is Steele didn't know anything himself. He's just saying, this is what I heard from my sources. Okay? Now, we know that after the first warrant, the FBI got a list of these sources. One of the sources was, quote, the primary subsource. In other words, this was the person that was responsible for the bulk of the claims of criminal actions that Carter Page was engaged in. And other things like the Peace story. So they actually, and this is important, right? It sounds complicated, but just hear me out here for a second, right? Let's say that there's a break-in in your town, and you didn't see the break-in, but your neighbor came up and was like, man, I saw it. I think it was this guy, and, I saw them go in, and they were wearing a red bandana, and, they went in, and they were in for 5 minutes, and then they escaped in a black Escalade, right? Okay. You tell the police, I didn't see anything, but my neighbor told me XYZ. The police are going to be like, thank you very much. What's your neighbor's name? We'd like to talk to him. They're not going to rely on your hearsay evidence. They're going to want to talk to the direct witness, the direct source. What's the same here? Christopher Steele saying, I've got all this information. People have claimed that they've heard all this stuff. Okay, that's interesting. Now it's corrupt enough that the FBI knew this was unverified opposition research. But after they first use it as a warrant to spy on Carter Page, they then contact his primary source. So what Steele says at this point is irrelevant. He's done. He's out of the equation. Just like you. If you say, I didn't see the break-in, but my neighbor did, and he said X, once they talk to the neighbor, you're out of the equation. It doesn't matter what your opinions are at that point. Because they're talking to the actual witness. You just pointed them to the direction of the witness. It's the same here. Steele didn't see anything with his own eyes. He's just reporting supposedly what his subsource said. This Kremlin person. So the FBI talks to that source. And that source tells them it's all garbage. He says, I can't believe this was used in an investigation. That's the first thing he says, right? Imagine that. Imagine being this Russian like, wait, what? You mean us sitting around having beers talking about a peace story? That's used to spy on a presidential campaign? Still being used to this day? Once the guy's president? Wow! If you're a Kremlin official, you're like, phew, the Soviet Union can only dream of this kind of stuff. He says, look, the P thing was just joking around the table. I never expected it to be used. None of that's verified. Trump's team never said the things it said about me being the source saying Trump's team talked to Kremlin officials. That's not true. They never had any inappropriate conversations. All of this stuff's exaggerated or overblown. I don't stand by any of it. I think it's all inaccurate. That's what the subsource says. Now that's it. That's the end of it. If you're the FBI, you say, well, time to wrap it up then. Geez, I feel bad we spied on Carter Page because it turns out all of this was garbage. Right? That's not what the FBI does. The FBI says, well, we're still going to try to use this dossier to get a renewal of the wiretap. That's unbelievably amazing. Again, let's go back to our example. I saw this, my neighbor said this guy with the red bandana named Jim broke into the house. Then he escaped in a black Escalade. So the police talked to the neighbor, and the neighbor says, no, I didn't. It wasn't Jim. What are you talking about? Of course not. I didn't see any of that. And the police still go, yeah, we're going to arrest Jim anyways. I mean, that's incredible. But then it gets worse. Now keep in mind, the IG said that at least 5 people were aware of the interview with the primary subsource. The FBI claimed that they found this subsource credible and to be telling the truth. So the FBI includes that information to the Fisa court. They say, we interviewed the subsource and we feel that he was credible and was telling the truth. And that's it. That would give you, so if you're the judge deciding whether or not to vote on, to allow the renewal of this spying on Carter Page, you first issue it or whatever, or your cohort does, which is ridiculous. But then they're coming back and they're like, okay, so we kept working, because that's what they're supposed to do, keep verifying the information. We kept working, we finally got to talk to the subsource, and as a judge, you're like, okay, so the subsource backed up what Christopher Steele said then, right? And they say, well, we found the subsource very honest, and they were telling the truth. We believe them. So we want to redo this wiretap. And the judge would be like, as a judge, you would think, oh, okay. Then the subsource was honest and backed up what Christopher Steele said. That's the impression you would get. That is, again, the exact opposite of the truth. He was honest in disputing everything Steele said, in disputing everything the FBI was alleging. That's what he was honest about. And the FBI misled the Fisa court to think he was being honest, backing up what the FBI said and backing up what Steele said. The exact opposite of the truth. Now, if this was a clerical error, if this was a mistake, they would have just left off talking to the subsource altogether, right? Oops, we forgot. We actually talked to the most important witness. We forgot to mention that. That's bad enough. But to say, yeah, we'll just cherry pick. I mean, this is so insane. Those two examples, that would be like, my wife asked me, did you eat the pie in the fridge? And I say, I did not eat the pie. And my wife's saying, Rob said, I ate the pie. No, you took the word not out. You said I ate the pie, though, didn't you? You said those words. Hey, how's it going, Carlos? This is not a clerical error. This is willful misconduct. Even if your claim is it's incompetence. So when you hear the FISA judge today say, oh, these were mistakes. When you hear James Comey say these were mistakes, these aren't mistakes. Now remember, one of the things that people focused on was the very last thing that Comey was saying, which was, Wallace asked him, would you resign if you were still there today and all of the IG report came out? And he said, no, way worse stuff happened under my watch. I mean, that's shocking. That's a shocking admission. But it goes along with why it's important to understand what these people are saying when they characterize this as mistakes. Because that shows you what they really feel. How many more times have mistakes like this occurred? They could justify anything. And this is constantly what happens with these intel agencies, with these bureaucrats. Let me give you another example in the impeachment saga, right? John Solomon, who's had excellent reporting, right? He is being discredited because he interviewed a prosecutor. Now, don't get confused by the names, right? But just know this. He interviewed a Ukrainian prosecutor named Lutsenko. This was a while back. Yeah, in my case, I probably ate the pie. But he interviews Lutsenko. Lutsenko's like, yeah, I was approached by State Department officials such as Yovanovitch. They gave me a list of people not to prosecute. And the media went, wow, oh, he retracted that. Oh, he didn't say that. Oh, the State Department officials said that never happened. Well, it turns out he never did retract it. He just said, well, there wasn't a literal list. He was just given names and told not to prosecute, so he never retracted it. But everyone says, look at what Vindman said. Look at what Fiona Hill said. Look at what Yovanovitch said. Look at what George Kent said. They all testified that they never told Lutsenko or any Ukrainian prosecutor to stop investigations into people. Right? That's what they testified to. I watched all the impeachment hearings with them. But then you go back and you look at, because remember, before the public testimony that we were able to hear, there was closed door testimony. Now, George Kent was the very first witness that was called by the Democrats. He's someone who worked at the State Department. George Kent has admitted, not only in his testimony, but in actual letters that John Solomon cited, that yes, they did tell Lutsenko not to drop investigations into certain people. Ones connected that were allies to the Obama administration, or ones accused of interfering in the 2016 election to help Hillary. And I said at the time, I said when I was watching the hearings, I said, look at this clever play on words they're saying, because they're saying, well, we didn't tell them to drop the investigation. We said, if you continue the investigation, it will jeopardize our cooperation with you. And so now, when they would be held up on perjury for saying, you testified that you never told Lutsenko to drop these investigations, but clearly you did, they'll say, oh, no, you misunderstood us. Yes, we told him that we disliked the investigation and we recommended stopping it, but we didn't tell him to drop it. Now that's a difference of no consequence. That's just semantics. But they're able to lie to Congress, to you, the American people, and if get caught, they can say, oh, no. And then they use that lie, right, when it's to their advantage. So, for example, you've heard the media. You've heard them say over and over, this was all conspiracy theory. Oh, Giuliani talking to Lutsenko. Lutsenko's corrupt and he's just a liar and we shouldn't believe anything he says. They still to this day say that. In part because the Republicans are terrible and they allow the Democrats to control the narrative. When the truth's the exact opposite. Yes, we have proof. We have official State Department documents with George Kent's signature saying you need to drop the investigation into Artem Sitnik, the head of the NABU, who was found guilty by a Ukrainian court of interfering in the 2016 election to help Hillary. By the way, he was just found guilty again this week of improperly accepting bribes in the form of vacation. Now, our State Department under Obama was telling the Ukrainian government not to investigate this guy. Now, remember, the same State Department, they're testifying, oh, this new guy, right, the new president, he's the real deal. He's finally going to, unlike that last guy, this guy's actually going to fight corruption. And what's one of the first things they do? Prosecute the former head of the equivalent of their FBI that was started with Obama, with aid from Obama. And they find out he's guilty. Why was the State Department protecting this guilty person? Oh, because he was helping influence the 2016 election to help Hillary, as he's admitted on audio. Now, this is one of the biggest stories in our country. No one's talking about it. We were told for 3 years, foreign election interference is the biggest deal ever. Now they're trying, and look how they conflate. They'll say, we know that it was Russia that interfered, not the Ukraine. As if two countries couldn't do it at once. That's how stupid they think you are. But do you see how that word game works? It's the same here. Comey, oh, it was just mistakes. It was mistakes. There were worse mistakes that occurred while I was there. Well, I would like to know what those are. Imagine giving Trump the same benefit of the doubt, right? Remember, for example, take one thing. They were like, oh, Trump committed obstruction of justice because he considered firing Mueller. Imagine Trump just came out and went to the mic and was like, yeah, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. Oh, a mistake. Fair enough. No big deal. He said it was a mistake. What more do you want? It was just a mistake. It wasn't willful misconduct. Just a mistake. No big deal. I mean, it's absolute ridiculousness. Now, another thing, I kind of hit on this the other night, but I don't see anyone else talking about this. People are doing a good job on Twitter, and I've seen other places. And again, if I wasn't so busy today, I could have provided you some examples. But trust me, they're out there. It won't take you much searching. Of pointing out how many people, for example, said the Nunes memo was incorrect and the Schiff memo was correct. Right? And for those of you who don't remember, you had this big Twitter moment, hashtag release the memo. And the argument was Nunes had a memo that showed that the Fisa process was abused and that the unverified dossier was used to spy on someone connected to Trump's campaign. I'll get to that in a second, Carlos. Right? Remember, that's what was going on. And then they said, oh, you can't release the memo. Remember? I remember Cuomo from CNN, specifically, I remember him saying this. He said, if you're the kind of person that's trying to look into the FBI, making these accusations against the FBI, you're hurting this country. How dare you? Just like Cuomo told us, you can't read the WikiLeaks emails. You have to come to us to see what they say. It's illegal for you to read them, right? So the media is telling you, you're not allowed to look at the FBI. That's our job. We'll let you know if they did something wrong. And if you try to, you're hurting lives and jeopardizing sources and methods. You're harming the country. That's what they said, right? You can't release the memo. It has to be redacted or it can't be released. And then it got released. And immediately Schiff released a memo. Now, Schiff had access to the exact same information Nunes did. Schiff's memo said the exact opposite. No, the dossier wasn't used that much for a FISA war. And no, the FISA process was totally legit. Yeah, I agree. Nunes is a hero. Smeared for what? A year and a half? Had an ethics investigation from a Republican-controlled House and Paul Ryan. An ethics investigation into Nunes over all of this. And he was right the whole time. But all the media, they all went with Schiff, right? Oh, Schiff must be telling the truth. Schiff's telling the truth. Schiff must be, oh, Nunes is a liar. He's a liar. Then every time Nunes would say something, well, he's a liar. We know he's a liar. His memo was a lie. Remember? Now, one of the reasons that was given by people, so we all know that, and we know Nunes was right, Schiff was wrong. But there's two things worth talking about here. The most obvious one is this. If you're a legit news person and you were duped, you're legitimately duped by Adam Schiff and by the Democrats that were saying, oh, no, there was no FISA abuse, and by the Jims Comeys and the Brennans and all these people that work at the intel agencies, right? You'd be furious, right? You'd say, okay, you'll never be a source for me again. You made me look like a total fool. I apologize to Evan Nunes. You were absolutely correct. And I'm not going to believe Schiff when he's talking about this impeachment garbage now. But no one's doing that. By the way, if you're James Comey, right? Or you're McCabe, or you're Rosenstein, or you're Baker, or you're Rebecki, or any of the people at the top of the FBI, Strzok, and you're working on these investigations, and you find out after you've been voraciously defending the FBI, or you're Christopher Wray, you've been defending them. How dare Trump accuse them of abuses? They didn't do anything wrong. They're great. It's a great, noble agency. They don't do anything wrong. How dare they be accused? They're hurting morale in the FBI. There was no FISA abuse, right? If you were saying that, and then it turns out, oh, actually there was. Wouldn't you be furious if you were unaware at the people below you that committed the abuses? Wouldn't you be like, wow, my own people lied to me. They should be held accountable. Wait, they're still at the FBI? Wouldn't Comey be out there interviewed with Wallace saying, my God, I can't believe these people under me did this? Wouldn't Christopher Wray be saying, I don't care what Trump's calling us. I can't believe our organization did this. But instead, they're all doing the opposite. Downplaying, it was just mistakes, no big deal, we'll fix it. That's how you know. These weren't people that were misled. These weren't people that were ignorant of the facts, thought they were telling the truth, but weren't. They knew. They knew the corruption was there, and they covered for it. And now that they're caught with their hand in the cookie jar, they're feigning ignorance. Just like the media with Schiff. They knew he was wrong. They knew he was lying. Or they at least knew they had no proof of his accusations. But they ran with them anyways. And if it was just a whoopsie on their part, then they'd be calling Schiff out today. But they're not. So that's number one. Just like, remember the Parkland thing with the Covington kids? Right? And all the media smeared them. And it turned out the media had the story 100% wrong. And people in the media were saying this. Oh, this, maybe this is it'll be a turning point for the media. It's a teachable moment. And I said at the time, of course it won't be. Of course not. How do I know this? Because the same day they're saying, we apologize to Nick Sandmann and the Covington kids. What was the next story they told? But did you know that 6 years ago, before these kids were even at the school, a kid painted himself black at a basketball game? Now that's not the actions of someone who's been duped and are ashamed that they were lied to and got the story completely wrong. That's the actions of someone who wanted this story to be true and are only apologizing because they got caught, but they're still trying to justify it. It's the same here. There is no change. They're running with the same crap, the Russiagate crap, today for impeachment. These are people that have learned their lesson. They're willful conspirators in the coup against Trump. They are not the free press. Now, the second part that I don't see people talking about enough, the first part I've heard some people say, but I haven't heard anyone say this, right? One of the things that people said, in particular, I will single out people that could have been arguing in good faith. One of the things they said, because no matter what, look, some of our intuition's better than others. I think I have really good intuition. I think that I've witnessed this corruption most of my life, and I've been vindicated over and over and over again. Not just with my vote of Donald Trump and wanting to see someone to fight back against the deep state, but in all of the specifics. Again, I can pull up everything I've written years before any of this came out, saying looks like what happened, right? Not because I'm a genius, just because I was reading, I wasn't just parroting the mainstream media. I was looking at other sources. But at the end of the day, we're all, at least all of us that are talking, and most of the media as well. Certainly they have more capabilities than me, but we're all basically ignorant of the specifics. In other words, we don't have access to the specific evidence until it's released to public. I just don't, right? So we could say the FISA process was abused. No, it wasn't. And at the end of the day, the argument's going to come down to, well, neither of us, I guess we'll have to wait and see, right? When it comes to the specifics. We could argue that generalities are true. My generality that I started with was, if you used, if you used unverified opposition research to spy on a political opponent, that's insane. That's the biggest political scandal in the history of our country. And I was right about that. But I knew the generalities of it. I didn't know the specifics, them lying, like I already talked about, the 17 abuses. I just knew that the general nature of it was corrupt. So, what am I hemming and hawing about? A lot of people overtly or made this argument or thought it and didn't verbalize it, which is this. They felt that there was no way that the FBI could have violated the FISA process using this unverified dossier to spy on someone connected to Trump's campaign because it seemed preposterous. And why did it seem preposterous? Because it would be so corrupt that there's no way that could have happened. That's why it seemed preposterous. I had people literally tell this to me, to my face, write to me online on different blogs. I've seen tweets of other journalists saying, no way this could have been done. No way. The FBI would never do that. It would just be insane. So it's just a conspiracy theory to think otherwise. Yet that's exactly what happened. Now, if so many people thought that it couldn't be true because it would be so corrupt it would be preposterous, where are those people today? Yeah, thanks, Carlos, and I'll have to check those out. I've read Margot, but I haven't seen Technophog, to my knowledge. Wouldn't you say, oh my God, the reason you said, right? Do you understand that? The reason that you said, I can't believe this could have happened because it would be, your brain can't fathom it being true because it would be so corrupt. Then when you find out it's true, you can't downplay the corruption then. That's not how it works. But no one's talking about that. They just let it go like, oh. This wasn't fringe people making these arguments. This was the mainstream media. The FBI would never do this. This was Jim Comey. This was people in the FBI. This was the Brennans of the world. The Clampers of the world. The Schiffs of the world. There's no way this could happen. The FBI would never do that. They're a noble organization. They would never do that. Then when you find out it happened, they're like, well, yeah, it's not a big deal. It's just a mistake. Well, wait a minute. You were so certain it couldn't happen because it would be so corrupt. Then once it happens, you're like, well, it's not that corrupt. I mean, it couldn't be more blatant. Now, the last live stream I did where I was getting pretty fired up, I had people say to me, oh, you didn't know? You didn't know that's how the FBI was? Of course I knew. Of course. I think anyone who's watched any of my videos know that. But it's one thing to know, right? It's like we all knew that steroids were being abused in baseball. We knew it. But when you saw Mark McGwire and them admit to it, you were like, wow, right? Because what's more shocking to me than that these abuses actually occurred, I'm not shocked by that in the least bit. I know they're corrupt. That's why I voted for Trump. I knew the intel agencies were corrupt and have been. I knew the media was corrupt. I knew the establishment Democrats were corrupt. I was 100% certain of it. I knew it. Of course, I'm right. But what's shocking is, one, that the information is made as public and as clear as it is. That literally all you have to do is have access to a computer to be able to read the report for yourself. And it's there. And second, that despite it being that public, which is shocking in its own right, that still the narrative is being controlled by people saying it's not a big deal. That's what's so aggravating and shocking. But how many people can I reach? 6? A dozen? Maybe 100 people watch a video of mine? I try. Yes, there are things I could be doing better. I'm trying to work on like audio, visual equipment, green screens, things like that. But it's going to take a group of us. Because the Republicans, they're not doing the greatest job. That's what's shocking about it. What else is shocking about it? Supposedly the FBI is involved with real criminals, right? Like cartel members, drug dealers, terrorists, sexual offenders, abusers, murderers, serial killers, right? I've been watching that show, Mindhunter. Great show. It's on Netflix. It's kind of about the FBI starting the term serial killer and how they started the process. Before that, the FBI started. Who was it? What was that gangster's name? Yeah, the kind of mobster type stuff. Because you just had state to state level investigations until that. So supposedly there are serious criminals that the FBI is supposed to be dealing with. I'm told this is their version. This is the Democrats' version. This is the FBI's version, the media version. I'm told, hey, don't worry, the people running the FBI aren't intentionally corrupt. They're just the worst people ever to do their jobs. That's it. They didn't know that you're not supposed to change evidence to say the opposite of what it says. Now, how am I supposed to feel under their interpretation? Not mine. Not crazy conspiracy theorist Trump that thinks that the FBI was biased and out to get Trump. Not me. Their version. They pick on me, right? Okay, so they're so incompetent. How am I supposed to feel good that they're going to stop the next terrorist attack or the next mass shooter? or sex trafficking rings. I'll trust us. They'll get to the bottom of the Epstein thing, right? Remember I did a video laughing at that. I think the video, go back and look at it. Like, go on YouTube and type in my name, and it was something like, can we stop with the lie that the FBI will bring anyone to justice in the Epstein case? You can't believe those two things simultaneously. That they're so incompetent that they literally didn't know that you're not supposed to change evidence to say the opposite of what it says. They didn't know that. That's how incompetent they are. But at the same time, they're going to get to the bottom of international child sex trafficking. They're going to find out the motivations of the Las Vegas shooter. They'll stop the next terrorist attack. The FBI should be disbanded immediately. Because it's actually more harmful to have an agency that gives us false hope that they'll do something than to have none at all. Because at least we'll be more diligent then. Our local police forces, our state police forces could be more diligent than assuming, oh, the FBI will take care of it. And the FBI's like, oh, we're too busy changing evidence to say the opposite. We just don't know. We didn't know. We're confused about everything. Or they're corrupt, which is the truth. Is that any better? No, it's worse. Maybe, I don't know. Flip a coin, I guess. This is an agency that can tear your life apart. Every communication you have can investigate it, spy on it. Anyone you're connected to could hassle. They could, even if you've committed no crime, do that. They could financially bankrupt you, like Flynn, based on lies. And they're either incredibly corrupt, incompetent, or corrupt. If you're a lawyer out there, any case that the FBI's brought that relied on Fisa warrants at all, in fact, I would say any case that they've brought in general, if you're a lawyer, I would be combing through the records to find those people that were convicted and going to every one of them being like, we're going to seek to overturn. Every single one. Why wouldn't you? Again, forget about the corruption for a minute. James Comey just wants you to believe the FBI under him were incredibly incompetent. That's what the media, that's what Chris Wray wants you to believe. Right? That's what they all want you to believe. If the FBI found you guilty of something, collected evidence, I would be out there and be like, dude, these people are so incompetent, they didn't know that you weren't supposed to change evidence to say the opposite of what it was. How do I know they didn't do that to me? I demand a retrial. I demand an investigation into the FBI's investigation of me. And regardless of what heinous crime you've been convicted of, I would have a tough time disagreeing. I'd be like, yeah? You could be some terrorist? I don't know. How do I know? I'm just going to take the FBI's word? Every single case. I will never trust the FBI again until people are held accountable. And I'm telling you, it's someday I'm going to run for office. And I know it won't be a winning argument. And I know that I'll get crapped on by Fox News and by CNN and everyone when I say disband the FBI. I am totally serious. Totally serious. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a federal investigative unit. It can't be the FBI. It needs to be tore apart. The people that are there, I'm sure there are some people that are there that are good. Hey, you had your chance to be a whistleblower and speak up. You didn't. 3 handpicked teams that were the leadership of the case at the top of the FBI, knowing this would be the most public scrutinized investigation that they've ever done, were incredibly incompetent or corrupt, we know. But again, I'm always arguing, and that's something that you should try to do. Even if your opponent's right, why did they still lose? Even if Trump did do a quid pro quo, why does it not matter? Well, because Biden's are corrupt and should have been investigated. So even assuming that they're right, which I'm not, they're not right, but if I assume they are, then the FBI should still be dismantled. Let's get rid of the CIA while we're at it. And the Fisa process, done. Why should any of us have any faith in these institutions at all? And of course, attitudes like me will then be used by the media and the Democrats and the FBI to say, see how much damage Trump's doing? That's like a parent who beats the crap out of their child and then's furious that CYS is making them look bad. It's you. You, the agents, did it. So get rid of them. Now, is it any wonder? Remember? You remember the outrage? Can you believe that Trump distrusts his intel agents? He said in Helsinki, he said he believed Putin over them. So would I. And by no means do I think Putin's a trustworthy person. I wouldn't believe anything my own intel agent said. When did they tell the truth? Can you give it? I can't even give an example of when they've told the truth. They're wrong about the Syria gas attack, weren't they? Or how about the State Department? Got to trust the State Department. Again, I haven't heard anyone else say this, right? Let's go back to the impeachment stuff for a minute. Remember all these heroes? Yovanovitch, what a hero. Vindman, oh my God, what a hero. George Canton, Ambassador Taylor. These people are heroes. Do you know our diplomats like that? Do you know what the sacrifice they're heroes. They're experts in the field. They know what they're talking about. Now, let's see some of the things these experts all agreed on. They all agreed we should give that aid to the Ukraine, right? They agreed to that, yep. It would be devastating for national security if we didn't. That's what the impeachment articles say. Everyone agreed. All of these people agreed. And they agreed it was perfectly fine for the Biden and Obama administration to not give the money until they were assured that corruption was being solved, right? They all agreed on that. They all said that, right? And they all agree that the new president, finally, this new president in the Ukraine, Zelensky, he's one that's fighting corruption. Finally, we got one. You see the problem? Do you see the contradiction there? In other words, they were all for Obama giving the Poroshenko administration all this money, but now they're all saying, oh, we acknowledge Poroshenko was corrupt. So if they were all wrong, all of them, every single one of them, they said you don't want to give the money to corrupt people, but they were all for Obama giving the money eventually once they got rid of Shokin, that prosecutor. Now they're all saying, oh, well, Poroshenko, the previous president, the Ukrainian people knew that he was corrupt. That's why they elected a stand-up comedian, Zelensky. And Zelensky's finally the real deal. Yet not one Republican asks, oh, so you're saying Poroshenko was corrupt? How much money did the Obama administration give to this corrupt administration? Maybe that's a reason we should be more skeptical of giving this type of foreign aid. But instead, they're all for it. Always give the aid. Always give the aid. None of them blew the whistle. None of them said, oh, we think Poroshenko is corrupt. Not one of them. Because he was working with Obama. He was Obama's buddy. So they were cool with him. And then as soon as he's ousted, they're like, oh, yeah, the new guy's actually fighting corruption. That old guy was corrupt. Litsenko was corrupt. All the prosecutors under the old guy, now they're saying, oh, they were all corrupt. Now, on one hand, they said Biden and Obama were right not to give the money while there was a corrupt prosecutor there. But on the other hand, they had no clue that the prosecutor that took over, now they're saying was corrupt. But they still recommended giving the money. We're told over and over again, these unelected bureaucrats, they're professionals, they're experts. They don't know the first thing. They're wrong more than they're right. But we still have to believe them. If we question them, we're harming the country. Pretty much anyone who spoke publicly at the FBI, any Democrat that had access to the background information like Schiff, and almost the entirety of the mainstream media, told us it was preposterous. It was a conspiracy theory being pushed by Trump's team and liars like Nunes and tinfoil hat wearing people like me to think that there were FISA abuses. That's what they told us, right? They all told us that. Now they were wrong. Yet without skipping a beat, they say, oh, but everything else you said was wrong and you have to believe us on everything else. They're wrong about Russiagate. They're wrong about the Fisa abuses. Over and over, they're wrong. And we still act like these people somehow are authority figures. And it's not just the media. It's not just the Democrats. It's the FBI. It's the State Department. You know, my buddy Carlos is in here. I think he's still watching. One of the things that blew my mind when I started running for office and getting involved is you kind of assume that people that do this, that have been career politicians, are like, they'll laugh you out of the room. They know more than you. And I have met some good ones, but that's not the way it is. This appeal to authority is garbage. You know, go back to the debate I did with that Destiny guy. What are they? This has been debunked by everyone, right? The same people that told us that Russiagate was absolutely true, that the Steele dossier was verified, that there were no Fisa abuses, those exact same people, the exact same ones, have told us everything about the Bidens in Ukraine. It's all been debunked. The exact same people. That's not an argument. It's a false appeal to authority. Just like with Christopher Steele, right? The entire case to spy on Carter Page was based on the reputation of Christopher Steele. And I've been arguing since 2017. But that only applies if his reputation is sterling. For example, we knew in late 2017, for example, that the FBI had supposedly cut contact with Steele because he lied to them. He said, I didn't talk to the media, and we know that he was talking to the media. That means his reputation is crap. He just got caught lying about the exact thing we're talking about. The dossier. So why should we trust it based just on his character? When people are debunking John Solomon's points or all the points I make about the Ukraine, all they say is everybody agrees it's debunked. But that's the exact same thing they said about Fisa abuse. That's the same thing they said about Russiagate. How many times do they have to be wrong before we could say, you know what? Would it be possible to get some specific arguments as to what's wrong about this? Can we stop just accepting the everybody says it routine? More information comes out today from John Solomon. Turns out Latvia had approached Ukraine weeks before Biden had Shokin fired and said that they had suspicious payments going to Hunter Biden. That they had questions of whether or not it was money laundering. Right? Now remember what we're told. Everybody in the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and all the people in the EU, and everybody else, they all knew that Viktor Shokin, that prosecutor, was corrupt. The reason that Burisma wasn't being investigated was because of this corrupt prosecutor. I'm not the one who said Burisma was corrupt. I'm not the one who said that the oligarch that ran it was corrupt. Zlochevsky. Who was it? That was the same people. The IMF, the EU, Obama, Biden. They all said Burisma's corrupt, the guy running it's corrupt, and the reason we can't get to him is because this corrupt prosecutor Shokin. So they got rid of Shokin. And they suppose now the NABU, Obama's allies, ran by Artem Sitnik, who I talked about earlier, the guy that was interfering in the 2016 election to help the Democrats. Who the State Department, George Kent, pressuring prosecutors in Ukraine. Don't go after this Sitnik guy. This same guy. Now, if he's working with Obama and Biden and they think the person was corrupt and now his agency's leading the charge, Surely they'll find him corrupt. Surely they would have went to Latvia and said, oh, we hear that you have evidence of possible corruption. But they didn't. Instead, they buried the case. And we were told, oh, there were no investigations of Burisma going on. Shokin just buried it. Nothing was happening. But we keep finding out more and more. Actually, that's not true. They're working with other countries. We know for a fact that the month before Biden issued his quid pro quo, that Shokin, the supposedly corrupt prosecutor, took over the assets of Zlochevsky, the corrupt oligarch. Took his home, his property. Does that sound like a dead investigation? If the government seizes your assets, you wouldn't say, they're not really doing anything into the investigation. But that's the lie we were told. No, we have proof that happened. We have proof. Not only do we have proof that we know Shokin seized those assets, but almost exactly at the same time, the lawyers for Burisma contacted the State Department, ran by Obama and Biden, and said, hey, Hunter Biden works here. Is there anything you could do to help end this investigation? Then coincidentally, a month later, Biden forces the firing of Shokin with this quid pro quo. At the exact same day that happens, these same defense attorneys that reached out to the State Department, they're contacting the new prosecutor. Hey, we'd like to talk to you. Then when they talk to him a week later, they say, look, we know that the former prosecutor was a legit guy. We know that people like Biden were wrong when they said he was corrupt. But hey, will you come with us to the U.S. State Department and try to end this investigation? And what happened? The investigation ended. But we have to ignore all of that evidence. Why? Everybody says it's debunked. Everybody. All the same people that assured you, that told you that Nunes was a liar, he's corrupt, the FBI's awesome, to even look into the FBI's hurting the country. They would never do anything like, it's preposterous to think the FBI would use unverified opposition research to spy on a presidential campaign. That's preposterous. No way it could be true. The same people who told you that, and were wrong, now they're saying, but hey, trust us about the impeachment. And the Republicans let them get away with it. There are some good Republicans, but that's the narrative. Now, why wouldn't you have people out on every network going, okay, what, don't you hire tech people? Shouldn't there be tech people cutting clips of every single person you're about to talk to? Are you going on Jake Tapper's show? Here's what Jake Tapper said about Fisa abuse before the IG report. You just play it on your phone. Here's what you said, Jake. Now, please go on and tell me about how the Biden stuff's all been debunked. Not only don't they do that, I've never heard one of them talk about Shokin seizing the assets, or around right after he seized those assets, Burisma's defense attorneys contacting the State Department. I haven't heard any of them even mention it. They just leave poor John Solomon, who's, what, the last credible journalist in the United States? They leave him get thrown under the bus. His phone conversations were leaked, or at least that they occurred, by Schiff. By the way, right, Solomon, the same people. Solomon was a liar when he was reporting about FISA abuses. That's what they said. Go to the Washington Post right now. It's behind a paywall, so I can't get to it. They have an opinion article up that's like, yeah, John Solomon was right about the FISA abuses. Didn't they say the same stuff about Solomon then? Oh, he's terrible. He's a hack. He's biased. It's Sean Hannity, blah, 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 blah. He's wrong. Turns out he was right. Oh, but he's wrong about all the Ukraine stuff. Trust us. Yeah, Haley. So they do. They say, oh, it was different with Russia. This is another lie. This is them doing semantics again, right? So the first lie they'll tell is, we know that it was Russia that interfered. First off, no, we don't. I don't care anymore. And I don't care if people say that this is conspiratorial of me. I have not I'm not going to trust the FBI. If the FBI is so incompetent, they didn't know, for example, not to change emails to say the opposite of what they actually said. How am I going to believe that the FBI was able to carry out a sophisticated look into a hack? Especially when they didn't even have access to the physical server. And they relied on a firm paid by the DNC called CrowdStrike, who then a month after they accused Russia of being the perpetrator of the hacks on the DNC system, claimed that Russia was the perpetrator of hacks on the Ukrainian system. Only the Ukrainian intelligence agencies found out CrowdStrike was wrong. So sorry, no, I'm not going to believe the FBI. And it's not my fault. They're either corrupt, which I know to be the case, or let's assume I'm totally wrong, and the Democrats are right, and the FBI's right, and the media's right, and they're just the most incompetently ran organization ever, in which case I still don't believe they're able to find out accurately who was behind the hacks. So that's number one. Number two, just because they may have attacked our elections doesn't mean that another country couldn't have. I can't believe you even have to tell people that, but you do. Watch the entire impeachment hearing. Would they ask every witness? And isn't it true that it was Russia and not Ukraine that interfered in our election? Yes, that's true. As if they're mutually exclusive, which they're not. Three, again, this has to do with phrasing, right? When you get down to it, they'll say, Russia was a top-down attack, right? But what the Ukraine did, it was just some rogue people operating. So therefore, what Russia did was the real problem. But there's a lot of problems, even if, one, there's no reason that should make a difference. Like, for example, does it matter if the prime minister ordered an interference in our election or just one of the prime minister's rivals in their parliament? Oh, if it wasn't the prime minister, then it's okay. That's what they want us to believe? That makes no sense. But second, even their characterization is wrong. For example, can you show me any evidence that Putin personally ordered Guccifer to do that? If we're to believe that Guccifer was a Russian, I didn't see a direct tie to Putin. They just said, oh, it must have been tied to their intel agencies. So what? We know that the interference in Ukraine was tied directly not only to their politicians, such as Lyshenko, but also with Artem Sitnik, who ran, what? Their intel agencies. But they're like, oh, well, the president, Poroshenko, didn't order it, so it was okay. Okay, show me any evidence that Putin ordered the hack. Oh, you don't have it? You just assume. You say, well, someone in their intel agencies did. That's bad enough. But in Ukraine, when we know, we actually have audio of the head of their intel agency saying, yeah, I interfered to help Hillary. All of a sudden, that's not a big deal. Oh, that's not top down, they say. Now, even if you say, well, wait a minute, though. Putin probably ordered this hack. Even if you say that, remember, the other part of the Mueller investigation and the FBI investigation is damning to the Democrats on the Ukraine. What did the Mueller report? Mueller talked about 2 instances of Russian interference. Do you know what they were? The hacks of the Podesta and the DNC. That's 50% of what he talked about. What was the other 50%? Where did the bulk of the charges come from against Russians? The Internet Research Agency, the Russian troll farm. Now, for those of you who don't know, what did these Russian trolls do? One of the first things they did was, there's a game called Pokemon Go, and they put ads on there that direct you to other sites where they talk crap on politics. Yep, they use Pokemon Go. Some estimates say $500,000, 500,000. Let's say 5 million even. I don't know, just so I'm not accused of shortchanging them. They put Facebook ads up. They put Twitter ads up. Now, most of the ads weren't viewed until after the election. Many of the ads were pro-LGBT, pro-Black Lives Matter. Some of the ads were anti-Hillary. After the election, when most of them were viewed, they were also directly responsible for having rallies against Trump. But you don't hear all that. All you hear is that an election that $500 billion was spent on advertising, that 500,000 or even we'll say 5 million from 12 Russian trolls was enough to swing it. That was literally their claim. That should have been laughed out of the room immediately. But it wasn't. It went to Capitol Hill. They said we have to fight fake news. Oh my God, I could have stole the election. Oh, it's so important. Oh, this was the Kremlin ordering more attacks on the United States. Only, yeah, that's not what happened, was it? Because then a judge had to rule that actually Mueller and even Bill Barr had to stop claiming that the Kremlin ordered that, because there was not one piece of evidence that agency was operating at the behest of the Russian government. Not one piece of evidence. So much so that a judge had to tell them they had to stop saying it. Now this is public knowledge. Yeah, every time we talk about the Mueller investigation, and they'll say something like this: Trump says the entire investigation was a witch hunt, but look at how many people it charged. 12 Russians and Manafort. And then the Republicans have to say, remember, this was at the Horowitz thing. Lindsey Graham had the beginning meetings. They say, excuse me, Horowitz, was anybody connected to Trump's campaign charged with any crime involving the 2016 election? No. But we're told all these people were charged, so it's still a great deal. And they always mention those Russians, those 12 Russians. But now we know. There's no proof that was top down. None. They don't say, well, if it wasn't top down, it wasn't a big deal. I guess we'll drop the charges. It's no big deal, right? They don't say that, do they? Have you heard one person say that? But wait a minute. With Ukraine, it doesn't matter that we have a Ukrainian parliamentarian named Lyshenko and the head of the equivalent of their FBI, Sitnik, admitting to interfering to help Hillary. That doesn't matter because they say, oh, that wasn't top down. So we're supposed to believe that the head of another country's intel agency and one of their politicians interfering, releasing dirt that was actually effectual to interfere in our election is no big deal. Now, if Lyshenko and Sitnik, instead of releasing information on that Black Ledger, if they would have just put some really mean memes up about Trump, oh, then that would have been reason to investigate, right? If they'd have been trolls, then it's reason to investigate. Releasing dirt of classified investigations that might not have been true, no problem. Do you see how, though, with the way they define terms, oh, it wasn't top-down interference like with Russia? Why is that relevant? What do you mean? What are the specifics? I thought are you saying that certain types of foreign interference are okay? But you don't hear the Republicans ever defend against this. They're too busy genuflecting. Oh, yes, Russia. Oh, what Russia did. Yes, Russia was so bad. I don't believe it. Sounds like xenophobia to me. Sounds like the same crap we've heard for 30 years. Pick an enemy, pretend they're the boogeyman, everything's their fault, and then justify the stripping away of our rights, justify the stripping away of our money, of our families that then go have to fight these ridiculous foreign wars. That's what it sounds like to me. And I can't see any of the evidence, neither can you. We just have to trust them. Trust the same FBI that's so incompetent, they didn't know that you're not supposed to change emails to say the opposite of what they say. They didn't know. But trust them when it talks about possibly going to war with the nuclear armed power. Trust them there. Remember what they say? It was an act of war. The hacks were an act of war. That's what the Democrats were telling us. No one breaks this down. No one. Who do the Republicans have that are breaking it down like this? We know that it was Russia. I mean, they anytime you have to repeat something that many times, you should be suspicious of it. Every single Democrat, every single one in the Horowitz hearing but it was Russia that attacked us, right? And nothing disproved that Russia attacked us, right? It was Russia. Nothing disproved the Mueller report that Russia attacked us. I mean, people side with Yovanovitch because the Democrats control the narrative. I talk about this all the time. Well, the Republicans, and again, they're establishment Republicans, your John McCain's, your Jeff Flakes that are just as bad. They're happy in their situation. But while the Republicans were fighting for, like, trying to win in politics, the Democrats were engaged in a generational war to control all of our cultural institutions that affect the narrative. Academia. Is there any doubt that they totally own academia? I mean, go read Jonathan Haidt. He has an organization called Heterodox Academy. Jonathan Haidt is a liberal. He's a left-wing person. Probably didn't vote for Trump. He understands that over the past 15 to 20 years, we've seen an exponential increase in the amount of left and far left people controlling academia. It's always swung left. You might have 35% right or center and 65 left. But now it's like 10 to 90 in many schools. So there are some outliers. And it's not just, oh, we're centrist Democrats. They're insane. They're arguing against things like science. They're social justice people. Liberal arts have taken over. Everything's intersectionality, right? That's academia. They're taking over elementary level. Preschool. Elementary school. High school. Every level. That's the left. What else do you got? Mainstream media. What's the newest number? What's the last? 95% negative coverage of Trump? Need I say more? Anyone with two eyes could see that. How about the entertainment industry? Now you might think, does the entertainment industry have that much influence? One of the things I always tell people is, one thing that people are smart about, even though I was talking about this appeal to authority not always being true, when people are spending huge amounts of money, most of the time, particularly when it comes in the form of companies or businesses that have many people operating in it, they kind of know what they're doing. Why is it that so many companies like Coca-Cola or Sprite or Nike, why do they pay celebrities and athletes so much to show their product? Because it works. The entertainment industry is hugely influential. Now it's losing influence because their bias and their corruption is so in your face. But particularly with young people and just people in general. And it's 95% establishment left-wing. So where do you go? Let's say you're someone like me or one of you people here. Where are you going to go to get away from that bubble? What are you left with? Church? That's probably a decent place. But it's becoming more left-wing in many circles. Look at the Pope. But nonetheless, the church has far less influence than it used to. And by the way, some of the influence of the church was not good as far as their political activism. So what's left? Social media? Online? The internet's the great equalizer. Why can I might only have 6 people watching, but that's 6 people watching. And theoretically, everything I'm saying to you tonight, throughout eternity, right? As long as we don't have a catastrophic world-ending event, will exist thousands of years from now, right? Think of it like the printing press. You go back to the Dark Ages. You used to have only a select elite were literate and could write. And then you had people that ran the printing presses, that they had control of basically the narrative because they had the printing press. Look at how much the world changed once that technology became more accessible, once people became literate. Well, it's like that, except, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a hyper version of that. Technology's advancing exponentially faster to the point where we could talk to people around the world instantaneously. Where you were getting your news before, where you had to turn into the nightly news, now you could get it from someone like me. Yeah. So what happens? they have to control that too. One of the things I always say, the establishment Democrats have to control the narrative totally because their ideas are so bad. If they had good ideas, they wouldn't need to censor you. They wouldn't need to control the narrative. They'd say, here's our ideas. People will come to them. But they're so bad that they have no choice but to have a stranglehold on all the information. Because once you start to look into it, you're like, this is unbelievable. Their positions are ridiculous. So you turn social media. What happens? You post it on Twitter. Yeah, you'll get censored off Twitter. YouTube, you get demonetized. The algorithm doesn't push you, right? Facebook, they're running political ads. They're shills for the left. All of this. We had Capitol Hill. They were like, we need to war on fake news. We got to stop fake news on social media. Right? There is nowhere. But despite their best efforts, there's optimism, at least online. But that's what's going on. That's why, that's a long-winded speech. That's why Yovanovitch is trusted over Rudy. Because they control the narrative. It's that simple. And it's up to us to try to do our best to infiltrate that narrative. Maybe you aren't comfortable speaking online in front of people like me. That's fine. Maybe you don't want to run for office like I did. That's fine. But there's other things you can do. Look at, like, some of the biggest people that are cracking into that. It's like Kanye West. Or like the people at South Park. Right? Using comedy. Using entertainment. It might just be you're a decent person to people in your life. And then they start to, you mean all Trump supporters aren't, Nazis? But, I mean, it is incredibly frustrating because the other thing is the Republicans are complacent, And I see it all the time. They just, Trump's going to kill. Trump will dominate and blah, blah, blah. They don't know, right? They don't know the importance of things like social media. They don't know the importance of online media. They don't know look at the hearings when they bring in like Zuckerberg. The amount of people that actually know what's going on are few and far between. Google itself has the ability, I forget that guy's name now, but the professor that talked about, they could steal as many as 13 million votes they could swing. Now that's more than anything Russia or China could ever hope to do. Yet the people running the show are clueless. They have no idea. And so we see something like this. Look at how brazenly Comey lied. Just watch that Wallace interview. He's a liar. It's blatant. Now picture that happening every day. From the FBI, from the media, from the Democrats, from academia, from the entertainment industry, from Silicon Valley. And you use logic back, and the argument's just everyone disagrees with you, so you must be wrong. It's incredibly frustrating. And that's what we have to fight back against. I mean, look, I'll just end with saying this. I am not naive enough to think that my beliefs are the only beliefs that are acceptable. But here's what I know about me. I care about this country. I care about the people that I think are being left behind by our politicians, even if they vote Democrat, even if they vote third party or don't vote. I'm willing to say I could be wrong about some stuff. I'm willing to have discussions about it. But until we end this corruption, our thoughts and people that might disagree with me on specific policy stuff are irrelevant because we don't have a voice. And if we don't change it soon, it'll be too late. If no one's held accountable this time, then the situation's even worse. It will become more brazen. Remember, they've tried to incrementally get this power over years and years and years. Trump was a cog in the machine, or they didn't anticipate him. They had hubris. They assumed Hillary would win. So they've upped their corruption to try to take him out. If no one's held accountable, it's a blessing in disguise for the deep state, because then they're able to say, wow, our corruption was blatantly out in the open and we were able to get away with it. So they're not going to stop. They're going to accelerate it. Tulsi. I don't know about Illuminati shill, but she's a hypocrite. She laments how she's treated by the media, but then supports impeachment efforts by the same media and Democrats that have wronged her against Trump. She supported an investigation into Kavanaugh based on the same type of smears. So she's a hypocrite. I don't care about her. But yeah, that's why it's important to deal with this. So yeah, I'm gonna be turning in here. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry my voice sucked. I'll be trying to do more stuff as the week goes on. If you could, please like and subscribe. If you could recommend me to some other people, I would really appreciate that as well. I'm trying to get to 1,000 YouTube subscribers so that I could mobile live stream. So if I go to a Trump rally or I go to a Republican convention, I could do something live while I'm there. YouTube changed their policy that you have to have at least 1,000 subscribers. I also have a Patreon account. I just started. I won't link today, but if you want to give me your money, I'd take it. I am trying to be serious about committing to more consistently putting material out. If you don't want to support me with money or something like that, do your own show or support other people that are doing independent stuff. Things like that. But it is important to do our best to try to support independent people that, even if they disagree with you, I recommended Jimmy Dore on this show earlier tonight. Jimmy Dore would not agree with the majority of my political beliefs, but he understands this corruption's bad and he's also independent, and that's what's important. So yeah, please do what you can to support independent content. I really appreciate it. And again, like and subscribe would be great. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I do really appreciate it more than you can know. It really means a lot to me. So, and the other thing is, I'm using an old setup today just because I'm not home. When I get home, I got a new mixer, I got a new microphone. So hopefully my stuff like that will be sounding better. So thanks, everyone. So, all right, have a good one.